Hi, my name is Angela Skiveris, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm the kinesiologist, and I have a bit of a mission in the next year or so, or maybe a little bit more, depending on how things roll, to speak with and dive into conversations with as many amazing kinesiologists, neurotrainers, specialists in the world of neurology and the human being and how it functions or dysfunctions at times. Today we're with a very special lady who has well over 40 years experience in kinesiology and neurotraining, which she'll go into the distinctions about how they're different. Same, but also very different. And this particular lady has a massive amount of training and experience and clinic hours. I would shudder to think of the amount of clinic hours that Jenny has. And I'd really love to welcome Jennifer Beasley. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Ange. Thank you for inviting me.
My deep pleasure. So, the whole thing around these conversations is really just to connect with and learn from as many amazing kinesiologists, neurotrainers as we can, and lift the awareness in society within the community. But also, I think it's kind of nice to reconnect kinesiologists and neurotrainers and people in that field. I've been enjoying that. I've been enjoying listening to how people come to kinesiology, how they work, how it's so different. We're like a palette, like an artist palette. Everyone's Absolutely. So different. And I would love to know, how did you, someone who's been in this field for 40 years, how did you come to kinesiology and then moving into neurotraining?
My very first exposure to someone doing a muscle test, which in neurotraining land we say muscle check. But I was actually 19 years old traveling around Australia. I had a 12-month travel around all of Australia because I decided that if I was to see the world, that I would see Australia first in case someone said, what's Alice Springs like? What's Perth like? And I was actually in Darwin, right up the north of Australia, and sitting in a little camper trailer watching something on the little black and white portable TV that you take in the back of your car when you're traveling around Australia. And someone was doing this funny thing with their arm on this TV program, and they were using mid-deltoid, like that, more of a chiropractic approach to using kinesiology and muscle checking, where you stick the middle deltoid out and it locks or it unlocks. Mm-hmm. And all as I remember now, as far as what happened, was that they were trying to show you how bad sugar was for you. So I don't even know whether they put it on the tongue or just on the person. I can't remember those details, but I know the muscle unlocked. And I remember being like, wow, does that work? Is that, because at that stage, I was 19. I'd done a little bit of teacher training in teacher college at first, and then I'd left mid-course or deferred. So I hadn't really had much of a life, even though I thought I probably knew everything there was about life at the time. And I jumped up and I thought, oh, wonder if that's true or not. So I got some sugar, and the friend I was with put it on them and got their arm out, and it actually unlocked. I'm like, whoa, that's really cool. And then thought nothing of it. Just went on my merry way and continued on finishing my basic teacher training for, at the time, it was early childhood education from 0 to 8. So I had another 2 years to go back to study and finish before I was actually qualified. So in that following 2 years, I then came across, was my mother actually, who's now passed about 4 years ago, but she goes, Jen, you should go to this man. He does some really weird things. He pushes on your arms and legs, and 1 minute they're really weak and the next minute they're really strong, or unlocking and locking. And I think I might have been having headaches. And I also had quite a severe scoliosis of the spine. So I had all these symptoms because of that. And I guess, mothers never really wanting to have their children suffer were always looking for something. And I think if it wasn't for my mother's broad-mindedness, that I certainly wouldn't be here today. Wow. So I went off to this man who was actually up at Tacoma, that's out of suburb of Melbourne in the bush. And he was working out of his garage. So he opened the door as I was coming up the driveway, and he had these piercing blue eyes and no hair. And his name was Andrew, Andrew Verity. And he had, I don't know how many classes he might have studied at the time, but not much, maybe a year's worth. But he was also at the time doing iridology and naturopathy and really excited about that. So one thing I do remember, he said, as he looked in my eyes, practicing the iridology part, I'm like, what's wrong? He said, you must have a very patient partner. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Quite like taken aback. Because he could see that I was quite toxic and there was a whole lot of things going on a physical level. And the next thing you know, I'm on the bench and he's pushing on my arms and legs, and 1 minute they're locking really firmly and then they're unlocking. And I wasn't really short in coming forward with saying the first thing that came to my mind in those days. And even now, sometimes I still refer to myself as Jennifer Bluntly instead of Jennifer Beasley, because I'm like, oh, I should have thought before I said that. And when he pushed on a muscle called tensor fasciae lata, it was unlocking, and then he rubbed the sides of my leg and then it was locking. I said, oh, you didn't push as hard. I don't believe that. You're just making this up. Because I didn't know where to place it in my mind, which I'm sure a lot of other people, they have this like reality check of, no, that's not real. Hang on a minute. I have to reshuffle things in my brain to have them work. And he goes, no, it's true. And I went, I don't know about that. He goes, no, I'm doing a class. Come and see for yourself. And I said, well, I think I just will, because I'm just not sure and I really like to prove you wrong. So I went along to my first class to kind of interested and maybe a little bit, if I were to be honest, wanting to go, but too scared to open up my brain at the age of 19 to a whole new possibility of letting go of control. What does it mean that someone can do something to you, which brand new clients experience still today, when you're like, here is a locking muscle, let's push on your arm, think of something good and how it's locking, it's nice and firm, and now think of something that really stresses you and unlocks. They almost go, oh, you've exposed me, oh, that's really scary. And I think I might have gone through that. And really the very first class, I was hooked. I couldn't really get enough. And so I was, by that stage, I had finished the basic teacher training in early childhood education, and I was working as a special needs teacher. And so I had 8 little special needs children under the age of 8. And they kept me very busy. So every weekend I would be learning something from about 20 onwards. And I think I might have done 40 weekends in a row at the time. I just couldn't get enough, anything that anyone did. So I went and did all of what people know as Touch for Health. I actually did that with Michael Wild, Touch for Health 1, 2, and 3. He owns now the Kinesiology Bookshop and Equilibrium in Melbourne, or he's actually moved further out of Melbourne now, country. And at the same time, I also did all of 3-in-1 Concepts classes, which Andrew was teaching at the time, and his own stuff. And then as I just kept going and was so excited about it, I'd go back to my school that I was working at and like push the teachers on the children's table, say, "Go, I got to show you this." Like I wouldn't even ask permission, which is the thing you're supposed to do before you push on anyone's arms and legs, is permission to, to muscle check and muscle test. And those days, I don't think we learnt it. But when I look back, I'm like, oh, I probably could have been a little bit more gentle and diplomatic, and would you mind if, and literally she's like, what do you want me to do? I'll put your leg up and put your arm up. And yeah, so lots of people got to share my experience, kind of whether they wanted to or not.
The excitement.
Yeah, I was so excited. I think after the second 3-in-1 concepts class, it's called Advanced One Brain, we get into all the emotional and checking for negative emotional charge and so forth. I was just so excited. I remember saying to the facilitator, I want to do this. I have to do this. The whole world needs this. And it was like something just opened up in me where I became literally obsessed to know everything there was about kinesiology. So my journey started with the basics of and the grounding and muscle checking, and then I went straight into Richard Utt's programs, applied physiology, which at the time I'm like, what are they saying? I got no idea what they're saying. And I reviewed that and caught up on what they were really saying sometime later, and then moved to the 3-in-1 concepts, and ended up being a facilitator and a consultant in that, because that had quite a big variety of programs. So the first probably 3 or 4 years of my training was find out as much as you can and experience that with people. And it was really after probably maybe my 3rd or 4th class, I started seeing people. Started on a Wednesday night and a Saturday morning while I was still teaching. And at the same time, I was also doing an advanced diploma in special ed, because the training for standard teachers had changed from 3 years to 4 years. So I had to update. So I was also doing full-time study for that as well. And even with the basics back then in the 1980s, even when I didn't really know what I was doing, even though I had a small amount of resources, I still seem to have people hug me and say, you're a miracle worker. What have you done? I'm like, oh, I don't know. It's just, putting things back together so you do the healing and the recuperation yourself. And I was okay about that, because I learned very early on that you're only as good as your resources and your imagination with that. So I was okay with not knowing it all, which I think was a benefit, where some people might, oh, I never know it all, I'll never be as good as you. So I started out quite early in my learning and kept earning and learning while I continued on. And it really wasn't until I'd finished consultancy, and by that stage, I had my daughter, who's now 33. In fact, I was 8 months pregnant when I actually did 3-in-1 concepts facilitator, because I couldn't fly. I had to go up by train to Queensland and come back down to Melbourne again, just to get the consultancy and the facilitator program finished. And it was really from then that I started to take it more seriously. And alongside of that, I was studying or wanting to study with Carl Ferrari and the neurological organizational technique. And so did half a dozen of those programs and just kept doing it, regardless of whether I was having babies or working or teaching or moving or those kinds of things. And at the same time, a few years down the track, in forming a working relationship with Andrew and continuing that throughout our whole history of friendship. We were originally called Educating Alternatives, educating people the alternatives to life and choices and so forth. And once we started to define what we were really doing, because we were moving away from saying the body said, or the person's body did this, and it's like, well, actually there's more than just the person's body. There's the physical, yes, and the body habits, but there's also the emotional expression and the mental and the psyche strategies, and then all the energetic. So it's like the person, it's not the person's body. And it's the subconscious that we're actually working with. And I think for a long, long time in the training where I first started, in perhaps the first 5 or 6 years, it was all about gathering a story and all about having an understanding of what's going on for the person, which in the end became a limitation to the approach. And we found very quickly that you could do things and people didn't know what you were doing. And then we started to connect the dots and realize that this is primarily a subconscious modality. There's nothing conscious about a kinesiology muscle check at all. It's neurologically, like from the nervous system point of view, something that happens without our cultural beliefs, our bias, or anything. It literally is a feedback mechanism that works on everyone. And that's pretty congruent by just manipulating spindle cells on a muscle. You don't make that happen consciously. But what was coming out of the session for a person, I found after doing so many programs of the same, that there was something in me that's saying there's got to be more. There's just has to be more to these stories that people gather, and finding the negative emotional charge on your childhood and your sexuality and your aging and your adulthood and this and that, and all the different themes that people in different kinesiology modalities created. And I thought, well, I actually started to feel sticky on the inside. It's the only way I can really describe it, like a question mark that hadn't come out of the box yet. And I remember turning to Andrew going, sometimes I felt like I was better off before I knew about all these things that are supposed to be wrong with me. And I realized then that all of the kinesiology modalities that I'd studied up until forming the neurotraining approach were focused on problems. And combining the muscle checking with what's your problem, let's see what we can do to do something about your problem, started to connect problem with muscle checking. So what would happen then is that people, even myself, I experienced, you fix one problem and then give yourself a day, week, a month, a year, and then you've got another set of problems. And that's a natural phenomena that we'll do when we're sorting and searching and filtering and retracing back through unfinished business. And that's something that we can't necessarily stop, because it's a natural process that we do to recuperate and heal. It's really more, how much do you want to keep attaching that to the use of kinesiology? So we started to form an understanding about the training of what's happening when we push on people's arms and legs. And if they're always thinking of problems, and you look at the problem and you balance a problem, it will be great. And then the subconscious will bring an older problem from an older time in your life, or even your ancestry. And I thought, as I said to Andrew in a conversation, it's actually got to be more than just this. And it's really, in looking at the training and understanding, the best training is for something for the person, like a resource that whenever they have another challenge in life, they already have the solution to that. And that's where, from the old company name of Educating Alternatives, moved from that to neurotraining, because it's became very clear to us that it's a training process. And you can actually train people with kinesiology in a very inefficient way. You can train people using kinesiology in a consequential way too. And people can aggravate and have consequences from a session if it's not done relative to the person's needs and how we all heal and recuperate and so forth. So that understanding of, well, actually muscle checking, even though it's a tool and it gives us a great evaluation of what's working, what's not working, how people are compensating, what's connected, what's not connected, what you do with that has the potential then for the client to do so much more when you do it in a solution-focused way. And so the neurotraining company name change happened really because of that. And so it was a natural progression of working out of problems to what does the person need to be challenged to already have the solution. And that meant less sessions, less for the client, less cost for the client, and a much more heroic way on a subconscious level for them to be able to stand up to physical challenges, mental challenges, relationship challenges. And it was more beneficial for me as a practitioner to see people become so much more of themselves, their potential. And like we have, everybody knows that we use such a small percent of our brain, and, we get into bad habits and we sit on so many of our resources that if we use the kinesiology with more solution focused, it will do it automatically as a habit without us even having to think about it. And at the same time, you're not retracing problem after problem after problem. So it was quite a big journey over probably 10 to 15 years in the first 40 years of my study, of realizing that although sometimes we have to look at certain problems and challenges in people, how the approach and what we do with that will have much more long-term effects for the client, rather than just using techniques upon techniques upon techniques for something that a person doesn't necessarily do as best with as they could if we had set them up in a solutioned way. So the solution-focused neurotraining was very much, well, what resources do you have? Which we all have. Like, for example, we have 9 intelligences. And how much of those are you using? Let's just turn on a few lights in those intelligence rooms and see what you can do in your lifestyle, in your work, in your relationships. And it made the training approach so much more easier from a practitioner point of view. Once upon a time, I might have been doing lots, 10, 15, 20 different techniques in any one session, and coming to a more solution focused and using certain principles of how we heal and universal principles of how we unravel things in our life and how we get better. I would then come down to a basic 2 or 3 and change their life to the point where I had more energy at the end of the day. And I was quite shocked at, well, didn't do much considering I know years and years and years of all these things that I could do. And I feel great and they feel great. And the clients responded as if they'd had 10 hours work instead of 1. And I didn't tell you about this and this in my list and all the things I didn't mention, and they've all gone away because we were using the principles where we all do the same pattern in how to basically retrace and heal ourselves. And it's just a matter of turning that on for a start. And so that became really exciting, that I found the answer I was looking for coming out of problem focused to solution focused. Not to say that, as I said, people will have challenges and problems. It's more what we do with that. So the neurotraining style using kinesiology became quite different. And it's there at the same time around the 15-year mark, could have even been a little earlier than that, where the model of universal principles was introduced. It used to be called the universal healing model, but we've taken a lot of words out of our language and moved them from healing to training. That way, we're not necessarily medical model based, which is not a preference for neurotraining. It's training the person to be their best. And that could be any training: nutritional training, emotional training, psychological training, energetic training.
Learning and memory training, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So then the neuroscientists started to develop and bring out their researchers, which started to really validate everything that we had been doing in the kinesiology community since the 1960s, that the brain does change shape and it does grow new neurons. So every time we as kinesiologists or neurotrainers rub a point or shift a certain perception, we're bridging the gap and creating a better option, for their nervous system to develop a connection. And that means more connections, more lights are turned on. One house talks to the other house, to the suburb, to the cities.
Neurons firing in places that they may have been dormant or shut down for some reason due to some type of trauma somewhere along the line. So that's I remember personally having come from almost 4 years of another kinesiology style, which it's all wonderful experience and research and techniques and whatnot, and got great results. But coming to that first level of neurotraining and being floored, like literally having to have a balance on my jaw because I was dragging around, just so impressed actually at the depth of knowledge that we went into around the nervous system, around the brain function, and what we were actually enacting as a kinesiologist, because that was one thing that I actually must admit, even after 4 years, I still wasn't clear what we were doing when we were muscle testing,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of people who are in that boat where they, oh, I just press the arm and, whatever.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand on a deep level what on a nervous system brain level was happening when that was happening. And in that first workshop, I remember, and it was like the basics that, I remember sitting there and getting, corns on my hands for trying to keep up with the note taking, because it was just such wonderful science-based information, which I loved that you and Andrew and others brought together to deliver, which I think was just wonderful, was excellent. And
yeah. Look, there's certainly, and I'm the first one to say, the original applied kinesiology and where that moved from to touch for health, that grew into the different styles of kinesiology in the 70s and 80s. Without that, we wouldn't be here today. And
absolutely,
I still, give much credit to them. Now we've got a better understanding of what's actually happening, and then our job is to do the best for the client and what the client needs to progress on an energetic level. And even though we talk neurology and nervous system, it still boils down to the person.
That's
and
right.
What's going on for them internally, and of course, energetically, because at the end of the day, everything's energetic. And one of our first classes notes that we're working on the spirit of the person, or what the Chinese call the Shen, the heart of the person. And you want to tread that with respect and clarity at the same time.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, it certainly became a really healthy addiction and a lifestyle for me. It's nothing that doesn't go in my day that doesn't include something about my work and my approach.
I agree. And I think a lot of kinesiologists and neurotrainers would agree that once you get bitten by this work, it's, for me, like you say, I can't, almost anything I'm doing during the day, everything I'm thinking about often comes back to this work that we do with people. And it's incredible.
And I guess just having the understanding, and one of the things I say to the students who just start the class, let's define the difference between kinesiology and neurotraining and neuroscience. And I drum it into their head and get them saying it to me in 3.2 seconds what the difference is. And really, kinesiology is a feedback modality. It gives you feedback responses. That's all it does. What we do with the techniques, that's the training part. And our approach, of course, is the training part. So, anybody can use kinesiology, which sometimes can be a bit scary.
That's right.
To see, I saw a YouTube video on someone, I think it might have been American, and they were doing the whole arm test to a really big audience, great big high platform stuff. And it was being filmed. It was obviously put on YouTube. And the person was muscle checking the second person with little black bags, just little black pull jewelry type bags with things in them, and muscle checking. One was a crystal and the others were other things. And unfortunately, whatever they did, whether it's they didn't go through pre-checks, whether someone was switching or blocking, when they finally opened up the bag, thinking that it would be the crystal because that's the thing that was best for them, it was actually the thing that was worse for them, and it was a lump of arsenic. And it's on YouTube. And you can see these people muscle checking these, blind bags, black bags, and they're placing them on their chest and doing this muscle check. And they were all strong and one was weak. And they said, I can't remember it was a strong, weak thing and which way around it was, but it made kinesiology and crystal therapy look really, really bad, because their whole focus was crystals are the best thing. This is what gives you the healing. And well, technically, crystals, you heal yourself. crystals don't do that. But then with the kinesiology, in the end, they said, they opened it up, well, it's not crystal, it's here, it's arsenic. So what do you say to that? And then they stopped the video. They didn't.
Yes, as you would.
Oh, the poor things. Because they didn't really know what they were doing, you know, and it's really bad sales and bad marketing. But the
Exactly.
point is that we're working with the person's nervous system, so we have to be neurological in some way, as at the same time be with the person and with the heart of the person and the energies of the person. And I guess that's what I enjoy most about the neurotraining's client-based model, is regardless of what we've learned, if we use a model that's universal to all people, whether it's culture, whether it's how they've been raised, whether it's how many traumas they've had in their life, the model always is the same for every human person. And it's a simple, you know, where's your challenge? Physical, mental, emotional, energetic, family, society, universal laws, and, you know, a few other things that also attach on to that. And then the techniques that we apply, which is what we all learn in kinesiology industry, has something to stick to. It's like almost finding the most appropriate context for the person. Then you get the technique, you do it, and it applies like Velcros. Whereas before, without the model of universal principles, I had all these techniques for people that they just wouldn't stick, you know.
Yes.
And so I'd have to do more hours. I'd have to do more work, and it would take them longer, and they'd have to return more. So once I used the model of universal principles, which is unique to neurotraining, I had to drum up more business, because my booked out 6 weeks ahead with 20 people on the wait list all of a sudden became very empty because people got better. And I'm like, whoa,
Yes.
wow, I've just done myself out of a business. So I go out and start generating more.
Yeah.
I was very big into the free presentations for many years. Both Andrew Verity and myself were big on that. I tended to start with kindergarten because that was where I came from, and the special needs community, mainly the younger children, because that's also was my original training. And I'd train on one of their teacher training days for free, or I'd go to a community house and talk about allergies, or I'd talk about maybe essences and kinesiology to drum up business. And so we just developed more and more until then we started to create unique neurotraining programs. And I traveled a lot, I guess, over a good 25 years, mainly throughout Australia. And Andrew did all of the international. So my place was to take care of Australia and get that out into the world and keep it organised. And he was just footloose and fancy free, and, you know, did his own thing in his travelling and the developments that he was doing at the time. So now we have an international business, or neurotraining is an international business now under just the College of Neuro-Training rather than just neurotraining.
It went from the certificate in solution-orientated kinesiology, which I completed, and then it went to, obviously, then there was that next evolution, change of name into the diploma of neurotraining.
So when you studied PAPS, we were still under the business name of Educating Alternatives, and we would deliver, it was really a certificate 4 level, called Solution-Oriented Kinesiology, the SOC certificate. And then when we flipped names, it became the Solution-Oriented Neurotraining certificate. And then the government started, more regulations, and registered training organisations came out in 2007. And so by 2008, we were an RTO. And they offered the certificate 4 in kinesiology, which our certificate just flowed straight into that. It was just restructuring a few things, adding a bit of workplace safety and so forth. And then they formed the diploma. And we had so many programs developed by then. it was just rolling out more. And then they wound back the certificate 4 and abolished that and brought just the diploma, which is currently actually overdue to be renewed. Quite a few years now to be renewed, which I'm not sure will be, from what I've heard. So it may go back to the more private industries again. We'll just see what happens. The College of Neuro-Training is no longer an RTO. I found that I was doing more administration, ticking boxes, than I was teaching. And the level of paperwork, anyone who owns a registered training organisation will understand that to do 60 or 70 hours is quite common per week because of the paperwork. And then you lose sight of the person, which is why you want to be doing what you're doing. So after Andrew passed last year in February, it solidified for me to pull out of the registered training, and also knowing where the kinesiology field is heading from a government point of view. I couldn't see the benefits, and I also could see that everyone, once they started, like you, they started neurotraining and then they just wanted to go down the neurotraining focus rather than learn some units of study in the kinesiology diploma that actually didn't help them to be a better practitioner at all. And it was very disappointing to see that happen when it first came out, because I was on the board for that diploma. And then the common units were added by another board. And the common units are quite challenging. The current common units in the kinesiology field for the diploma are not necessary. It's not necessary to write policies about occupational health or business. It just isn't to be a single practitioner in kinesiology. So a lot of our students, or actually 98% of our students, just kept doing more neurotraining and all the money and time to the neurotraining. So I thought, well, I'm a one-man band now, with a few campuses around Australia. I've got to get to know all the internationals. So it took me 4 months to deregister. I think 81 pages and so many 60,000 entries because I had to write down every single thing every single student had done from the very first time we opened. So it was pretty huge to do, as well as move the 2-story building we had in Melbourne back to Tasmania, where I am now. But that's all done. And now we're free to keep creating I'm and the trainers that are also training to do how we want to do it, rather than, I guess, have to be stuck in a pattern of being answerable to authorities that it just didn't work for us.
That doesn't necessarily understand the model and how it works. And so fundamentally for people, like, they can still, if people choose to go down the line of training with neurotraining and they want to do, a certificate in or whatever that you're now offering, they can still quite happily practice once they've reached certain level of proficiency.
Absolutely. They can actually practice halfway, because our halfway mark is equivalent to a certificate 4 and gives them enough hours to start practicing. But anyone from the kinesiology community solely can come over and do a class or a number of classes, because the original model of universal principles was born for 2 reasons. And the first reason was, when we were in the Netherlands, there's a lovely lady called Kobe Shasfoot. I don't even know if she's still alive, because she was a lot older than myself when I was over there 25 years ago, or 20, maybe 28 years ago. She wanted to set up a kinesiology hospital. She had a lot of land in the Netherlands, and she wanted to make these pods and to help people recuperate and recover from diseases or accidents or whatever. So they'd do the hospital medical, and then they would come to these places and people would help them recover faster. So she came to us and said, what could we do as a model that would suit nurses and doctors who are into alternatives? But particularly nurses seem to be more open-minded to different things to help people heal. And it was really the model of physical, which is in the model in the chiropractic kinesiology model, and physical organs and systems and glands and diet and herbs, but also psychological or mental and emotional, and then energetic in the middle that combines it all. And to basically muscle check from that, real basics. What does this person need to recuperate? Something physical, something psychological, something emotional, or something energetic. So they learn the basics in kinesiology, then they learn how to best apply it for the person in recovery so that they could recuperate better. So the two reasons became the whole model of what we follow now. And over the decades, it told us more and more about human existence and the human psyche and how it really functions on an energetic level. It's just been amazing. It's like this entity that just keeps leading in, certain directions. And that was developed by Andrew himself, and a lot of programs off that came from the original development. And then since then, with the understanding of genetics and epigenetics, I've then incorporated that into the model, because we've got genetics, which is more physical, even though it's energetic, and the nutritional needs for that as well. So that's really more my focus these days. From what does a person need to clean up their toxicity in the past from the things they've done to themselves? You need to do this, you need to say that, you need to think this, you need to swallow that, you need to have this lifestyle, to, okay, what's the damage being done to your DNA that's now leading you to being what you are and what you will become? Because at the end of the day, we will walk into habitually how we're wired. And if that wiring has a few glitches, which we all have been challenged, and we all have a genetic system, we will walk into that habitually. So my sessions are very much about breaking up the old habits, putting in the new habits. So then energetically, they've got new pathways to follow, whether that's with DNA or whether that's with some other challenge. It's been really exciting to see people understand themselves more. Like, why does a vegan have high cholesterol? Because their DNA that does their fats and triglycerides isn't working. So it's like change the reference from a nervous system point of view, which is what we do as kinesiologists and neurotrainers, is we give another reference, another option. And that's why we call them better options. So if the person's going down a one-way street and they're feeling pain or hardship, or they've got a fat belly, or they've got cholesterol, and it doesn't matter what they eat and do and exercise, it's not changing. Well, the internal mechanisms, the subconscious mechanisms that the neurology is stemmed from, is easily accessed with kinesiology. And you can do some great work on reconfiguring that out so that a vegan doesn't walk into cholesterol problems. Because it's quite bizarre when you think about, how could a vegan have high cholesterol when they don't even eat any meat? Or any dairy. There's no fats at all. And it's because that's how they're wired. So they were going to go into that anyway. Maybe a little later, because they didn't have all the fats originally, but they were heading in that direction. So our habits are a big part of the work that we do now, is breaking up the habits, those silent killers that just head us into dysfunction.
Exactly. And there's also the myriad of possibilities around why is that person having experience with excessive not irritation, but inflammation in their system, which in some ways cholesterol comes in like a healing balm. It's like, well, what is their body, it's like there's so many ways that we can look at why a body might be doing something, or a spirit or a soul or a person or a pattern. And you just think, wow. When you said before, it feels like some entity guiding there's often many days where in session I find I'm being taught in session about something, that two things that you could never imagine coming together or making any sense. And yet by the end of the session, you're both sitting back going, my God, that all made complete sense. And yet I had
Yeah.
no idea about how that functioned, or this little part of, sometimes you do have to go Mr. Google and think, what is that particular scientific
Yes.
name? I don't even know what that is. Let's go
I
find
can't
out.
even pronounce that name. Let's look it up.
Let's
Yeah.
look it up. That's right. And so you go look it up, and they say, oh yeah, my grandmother had that. Or so I think, oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's
It's
sometimes
extraordinary.
that's the challenge in other modalities, looking from outside in to the kinesiology modality, because kinesiology is so subconscious, and you've got the client's subconscious and the practitioner's subconscious that are networking together. And so if you've learned A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they haven't, it'll show. If they've got some incongruent something or other here that you have access to, and you know how to do that, it'll show. If you haven't learned it, it may not show. And that's why some of the things that we do that we have no idea of, that we do have to go look it up in a dictionary or Google or a herbal thing. And how could you, they say, the outside people looking in, how could you ever know about that herb or that nutrition or that function?
Yeah.
You haven't learned it. It's not about always what we learn. It is good for a direction. But if it's reasonable to balance a person's nervous system to the dysfunctional pattern, and they can be better, why not? I'm not saying that if you haven't studied herbs, to give herbs, even though you read it out of the book, because that's the last thing I would say, is know what you're doing when it comes to putting something in someone's mouth, because you're not qualified. We're qualified. A kinesiologist is qualified to work with the patterns of the nervous system. That is it. Not to diagnose, not to give herbs and homeopathics. Go get other qualifications to do that. And it's one of the reasons why I did that. Got my naturopathy and iridology and homeopathy and herbalism and nutrition, so that I could integrate more for the physical person who needed that. And not everybody needed that. So I like to be teaching students, well, it's got to make sense before you give a triple dose of something that actually can be quite toxic.
Oh God, yeah. Anything can be, depending on
Or relative
dosage and all that kind of thing, reactivity, or absolutely, that's right. So I mean, and you have other solutions for kinesiologists or neuro trainers, if they're not necessarily, not working in the world of herbs and whatnot, but more on the energetic level of how they might be able to work with somebody on the body.
Yes, on the person. Yes,
on the person. Yeah. What are those things?
Well, I've created some energy cards for those that aren't herbalists or naturopaths, and don't all travel, because one of the things I find really challenging is that I travel. So, one of the bookshelves behind me, I've got 4 of those, and I can't put them all in my suitcase to place them on a person, to challenge the person, because it's really in how you challenge the person is your best way in. You could be doing all their symptoms. I've got a headache, and I've got a sore toe, and I've got nail fungus, and I've got stress with my relationship, and you can work on those individually. But 1, are they the cause? And 2, is that the best challenge in to deal with all of them? Right. And so I can't be carrying suitcases worth of things and fill my bags up. So I created these energy cards. And this, for example, you probably see it back to front, St. Mary's thistle in a 30C potency form, which is, technically in homeopathic if you were to put it in drops. So it's not drops. They don't take it orally. That the energy in the fiber optic, which is where our telephone systems work from, is placed over the navel, and we just energetically absorb through the navel, and you can muscle check. So if somebody needed a particular herb, then they would balance them to the frequency of that herb. If they needed at the end a dose, they would have to go to a naturopath and have that signed off, such as myself or another naturopath. And the case study notes would have to make sense. But in having said that, there are like tissue salts, for example. A lot of people can get those over the counter. There's actually reflexes on our body that can give feedback to whether you need tissue salts or not. And, I was talking about this with the Australian Traditional Medicine Society directors some many years ago, we work on the patterns around the nutritional imbalances. Because sometimes you can take St. Mary's thistle without having a neurological balance. And as soon as you stop taking it, the problem comes back. Why? Because the pattern hasn't been dealt with. So we work with patterns with people and giving them the best options to be challenged by that, to come out of it for long term. And one of the things, there was some research done by a kinesiologist in the 90s, and she did negative emotional charge and stress on people, 3 sessions, and long and short of it all was everyone felt better, but 7 out of 10 was the limit that got much better. And that showed us very quickly that there's like 25% of people that don't change. Why is that? Because other patterns are going on that we're not looking at an acute level. You can't reach those other patterns at a deeper level. So working with the reflexes and the patterns in the people enables us to get into chronic imbalances and those habits that send or could send people chronic, whereas we could have not been able to do that before with just working at an acute level. So working more chronic and more constitutional approach to the person, and is their genetics heading in the right direction or not, seems to have the best option for people as far as their changes and their long-term recuperation. So these frequencies and the cards, the energy cards, are just clinic resource cards that our students can purchase and use. And they can also, if they actually need a dose, there's a certain thing that you do through the belly button to give them an energetic dose. Then if they have to take the herbs, the energetic doses in their field, because our chakras tend to take things in and our auras, and then it stays there as a memory. And we use it when we need to. So we can program on an energetic level, which is nothing new to you. And that's where sometimes it starts to get a little bit like out there for people who haven't done the work that we do. Yes, we can program subconsciously on an energetic level for when person takes a certain dose of something or not. Or we could use these frequency cards, and then when they do take the physical herb, it works so much better.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So can anyone purchase those, or do they need to do certain training?
They need a little bit of training on how to use them, so that they've got an idea on the best approach. And so they can be bought in sets or single cards. Like if someone just wanted a couple of vitamins, this is vitamin K and vitamin E and vitamin B, rather than carrying around vitamins, they could be using the cards. I've got a new class, or it's not a new class, but a class we offer called Nutritional Alternatives coming up in April, and that deals with a lot of bacteria and viruses and blood chemistry imbalances. So having cards to determine old patterns, old dormant patterns, bacteria and viruses is really handy, particularly the flu viruses and all those other nasty viruses that people haven't been coping with in the last few years. So they act as a challenge system, which is what homeopathy does. It actually challenges the person internally, physically, mentally, emotionally, and energetically, like shakes the apples off the tree, and whatever loose apples are there will fall off. Like, oh, there's a problem. And these do the same thing, but it gives us the ability to recontextualize the pattern in the person. So then they go away and integrate that after the session and heal themselves. We actually don't heal the person does that on their own. So yes, you can buy them, but there are basic courses. I did do a small course called the Summer Series Frequencies, and I've already got that registered with the Australian Institute for Kinesiologists for people who want to do CPE. And I did that online, so that's available for people to understand about the frequencies and how to use them. Generally speaking, like I did a flu and an anxiety panic disorder, and I did a first aid. And so they get to understand, they learned about the frequencies, and then they learn when it shows in a session, this is what you have to check. There's all these, what we term pre-checks, to make sure that there's no aggravation, there's no consequences, and that it's safe, and the absorption and utilization is going to be, okay for them. And then, if they needed a dose, it's just a matter of giving them an energetic dose of that. So
Exactly.
it's quite simple, but much more powerful. And you're not dealing with traditional homeopathics if you're not a homeopath.
Which is fantastic, and empowers us to do good work, but at the same time protects us from,
Yes,
going
that's
off into
the
areas
idea.
that we're not qualified
Yeah.
to dabble in.
Yeah.
And it's showing the respect of the various areas such as homeopathy and such, that they are powerful. In the wrong hands, all things can
It's all
be
relative.
detrimental. That's
Yeah.
right. So
And it's like our work is so integrative, energy, physical, emotional, mental. It's the counseling, it's the emotional, it's the physical, herbs, it's the naturopathy, it's the iridology. It's like, how can you not learn that? Well, I learned it all because I was lucky enough to have the ability to do that, but not everybody can do that. And so I'm creating a much more user-friendly, the neurotraining is very naturopathy focused, we have a course in iridology and using kinesiology. We even have a course in astrology. So if you're really into astrology, then deal with your astrological misperceptions, and you're not affected by the moon and the changes of the planets and the Mars in retrograde and all of those things that happen that affect us energetically. You get your pattern for your own cosmic chart balanced, and you're so free of all this time and space continuum stuff that really can do people's heads in.
True.
So that's why we offer so much, so people can select what they're interested in, and then they can specialize in their diploma of neurotraining, maybe in women's wellness, or maybe in behavioral genetics. We do hand analysis and face traits and combine those so that people can understand where they're going mentally and emotionally with other people in their relationships. We've got a trauma recovery one, so if they can dabble and choose out of the 50 different programs once they've done the basics, what they want to specialize in, and it suits their liking and their values. At the same time, they're getting a qualification in what they want to do, and it all works with helping the person in the best way.
Exactly.
Rather than just a whole lot of techniques.
Well, all I can say to anyone that's thinking about training, doing neurotraining style, is that when I started neurotraining, I didn't care what workshop was coming up. I was there, and just care whether it be teeth or fears, habits, and beliefs, or it was just every workshop was just another facet to the beautiful diamond that is the human being, and fascinating. So I can't say enough for neurotraining and all it's done for me as a kinesiologist, and developing into becoming I call myself a neurotraining kinesiologist. It's moving into that specialization. So where can people reach out to you to, maybe find out more about training?
Well, certainly look up the College of Neuro-Training. We've got a 1300 number, 1300 682 655. And that goes through to my mobile and follows me everywhere. Occasionally in Tasmania, I don't get reception, so just be patient and keep ringing. We pretty much everything, apart from a couple of really super hands-on classes, everything's online. So, they join a class, they get the PDF, PowerPoint, and they get a recording of the class so they can watch it again. And then I will travel and we'll have practice times with certain groups, or I'll organise for other people who are in their second and third years to practice if they've just started out with the first years. So they're everybody's got support. There's a fairly strong and big neurotraining community that are quite happy to support other people.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Well, I look at it and I hope you feel proud of the contribution that you've made to kinesiology and its evolution. And I think about sometimes like that work that we learnt over time. So, you become kinesiologist and neurotrainer and you help a certain amount of people, and then you empower by creating
Yeah,
the courses that empower another, say, 10 people.
absolutely.
And they go out and help 10 times more people than you could possibly help on your own. And over the 40 years that you've been working, and now, in creating coursework, the legacy that you're leaving behind is monstrous. It's huge, actually, in terms of, if I try to think about the amount of people that have
Yeah,
become trained and then are going out and inspiring more people to become trained. I know you're helping people without even knowing you're helping people
yeah,
out there in the world. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work and discipline and commitment and passion that you put into all that you've contributed with kinesiology and neurotraining,
you too.
and all that you continue to do. So before we finish up, what are you particularly inspired about this year? Anything in particular that you're offering or you're looking forward to with where things are, the direction that where things are going?
I think once I got over myself, I had a bit of an attitude of, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Kinesiology is a hands-on modality. How could you ever do it online? And when the kinesiology associations gave the tick off for you can do 100% class, I'm like, whoa, well, if they're doing it, I really need to step up and start doing it too. So once I got through the hoops of how that looked like and how to best present it from a student's point of view, it's opened up so many more things. So now, alongside of the solution-oriented neurotraining certificate, which is like the first step to becoming a practitioner to a diploma, we have 30, 40 other activation classes that are modules that you do to turn systems back on. The frequency class over summer, and the compromised blood class for the checking people for compromised blood and making sure the connection's there, because blood can make the kinesiology not work properly, and you wouldn't ever know that unless you checked it. And doing that over the summer is shown me that I can do lots of small, sweet things for someone who just wants to learn a little bit or see it for the first time, or add some education points to their references for the year. So the next one, after I do the big nutrition alternatives, because that's a very big class for the diploma people, and while I'm doing the activations for the beginners, I'll probably move into a gut biome, and using the bowel nodes with energy cards, because the gut-brain axis, it's a big deal out there, and it does take over the nervous system more so than your constitutional imbalances. So as we learn and develop about what's happening for the person, we're like, oh, this is really where you've got to start. No, it isn't. This is where you've got to start. And we learn and develop more. And it's like, oh, hang on, wait a minute. And then you've got like a tray of checking and challenging where to start with this person. The nervous system of the gut has a big deal over the rest of the nervous system. So it's becoming more of, this is what the learners in their earlier stage need to know now, along with compromised blood, before they even start. So I'll probably, I've definitely got dates. I just haven't put it down on paper or released it yet. There'll be a 3-week series of a 2-hour online coming up for that. And it will include the bowel nosode cards, which are traditional homeopathy approach, and all that information, and then how to do and use that in a session.
Perfect.
So,
That's exciting. That's great work.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Well, anyone, if you're interested in jumping on board with neurotraining, please, you can't go wrong. It's certainly been and is still it is my favorite modality, and it's made a huge difference to me. So thank you so much for coming on today,
My pleasure.
I really look forward to sharing this out with everyone. If you're a kinesiologist or a neurotrainer and you're keen, I said to Jules, a lovely lady that reached out, that's a friend of yours actually, I said, you should come on and chat with me sometimes. She said, oh, but I'm sort of still learning. I said, I'm keen to talk to people at early stages because it's, and I don't care how long you've been, you're keen to have a chat and connect up, then please reach out and let me know. I'd love to chat with you. And if you have other questions or a particular area that you'd love for Jen to dive into, I'm sure she'd be happy at some point in the next couple of months to jump on again and dive into something a little bit more specific.
Well, I am jumping online for the association as well, coming up next month on hand analysis and how to get into the subconscious psychicness of a person and how to balance the genetic behaviors that you inherit from a mental point of view. So it's like, that'll be a fun thing too. Really love talking about that.
Oh, beautiful. So you're on Facebook, Instagram, the college is on?
Yeah, the college is on Facebook.
Yep. So you can find Neuro-Training College on Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. If you're looking for more information about what's coming up, you want to, keep on the wave and see when things are happening or get dates, please reach out. So, but thank you so much for coming on today, Jen. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure.